Have you ever wondered why some men, no matter how strong, brilliant, or spiritually aware, seem to fall apart inside certain relationships? Not from betrayal, not from loss, but from something far more invisible, something psychological, symbolic, and soul-deep. There is a type of woman who doesn't break men with cruelty, but with silence, with softness, with the subtle mastery of the unseen. And the most haunting part? Most men never realize what's happening until it's too late. A sense of purpose fades, their fire dims, their identity dissolves, and yet they call it love. Nietzsche warned us, not against women, but against illusions, against the unconscious worship of a fantasy dressed as salvation. He saw how easily love becomes a stage where unhealed wounds and ancient shadows play out, and in this sacred theater, the masculine often forgets his own script. He becomes a ghost of himself, orbiting a presence he once mistook for divine. But what if love was never meant to complete you? What if the type of woman you're drawn to, or the type you fear, is actually a mirror sent by the universe to awaken your sleeping self? In today's journey, we're not just exposing patterns, we're unveiling sacred truths. We'll walk through the hidden dynamics of emotional strategy, the spiritual traps of idealization, the karmic loops of narcissism, and the mystical path to conscious love. This isn't just a video, it's an initiation, and if your soul feels the pull, stay with us until the end. Because what you're about to discover might not only explain your past, it might reshape your entire future. And hey, many of you watch our videos, but aren't subscribed yet. If this message speaks to something deep within you, subscribe now to Celestial Truths and become part of this sacred circle. What you're about to receive could be the key you've been waiting for. There's an ancient illusion that has quietly shaped the way humanity experiences love. An illusion Nietzsche dared to expose, like tearing the veil from a sacred idol. He challenged the ideal of pure and unconditional love, revealing it not as a divine gift, but as a cleverly disguised contract, wrapped in poetry and cultural myth. Romantic love, as the world knows it, often masks a deeper hunger, not for union, but for security, identity, and escape. It is a theater of the soul, where fear of loneliness wears the mask of eternal devotion. In truth, many do not fall in love. They fall into need, into expectation, into dependency cloaked as virtue, and so begins a performance, one that leaves the spirit fragmented, the self unheard. If one listens closely, the universe speaks through silence, in the hesitation before a kiss, in the unspoken tension of unmet expectations. Love, in its distorted form, becomes a subtle exchange. I give you affection, you give me purpose. Yet this barter, masked as sacrifice, can never nourish the soul. The seeker who walks blindly into such love may soon find their inner light dimmed. Jung would say, this is the moment when the anima and animus, the inner feminine and masculine, cry out for balance. But instead of inner integration, the modern lover projects their shadow onto the other, expecting them to complete what was never whole to begin with. Here lies the tragedy, seeking the sacred in someone else's wounds. Romantic ideals have sold us a dangerous myth, that love should rescue, redeem, and erase our flaws. But this narrative leads not to awakening, but to entrapment. When one believes they are only whole through another, they become vulnerable to control, emotional manipulation, and soul-level fatigue. Nietzsche's insight wasn't cold cynicism, it was a spiritual unveiling. He wanted us to see beyond the veil, to stop calling codependency fate and emotional fusion destiny. True love cannot be born from unconsciousness. It must rise from a place of clarity, of rooted presence, of a soul that knows itself before offering itself to another. To awaken from this illusion is to hear the soft whisper of spirituality beneath the noise of romantic fantasy. It is to understand that real connection does not complete us. It reflects what we have already become. In a mystical sense, every lover is a mirror, and every heartbreak is a teacher. Those who suffer repeatedly in love are not cursed, they are being initiated. The pain, the longing, the ache of not being enough, these are rites of passage for the soul. They press us inward into solitude, into reflection, into the sacred silence where we begin to see not just the other, but ourselves. And in that seeing, a deeper love becomes possible, not as escape, but as presence. So, the question emerges, what does it mean to love without illusions? It means to return to the self before returning to another. It means to listen to the mystical patterns of the psyche, through dreams, synchronicities, and emotional triggers. It means to ask, do I love them or do I need them? There is a difference, and it is cosmic. To love consciously is not to avoid pain, but to embrace it as a guide. It is to meet the divine not in perfection, but in vulnerability. And perhaps when the seeker finally understands this, the whole universe shifts in response. Because love, true love, begins where illusion ends. And from that place, the next truth begins to unfold. In the secret architecture of human relationships, there exists a power not easily seen but deeply felt, the invisible influence of the feminine. Nietzsche, with his sharp philosophical gaze, observed that when women were barred from external forms of authority, they turned inward. They honed an intuitive intelligence, an emotional strategy not rooted in deception, but in survival. This was not manipulation in the way the world condemns, but a sacred dance of perception, a way of reading the invisible currents beneath what is spoken. Women, silenced for centuries, learned to listen not with ears but with energy. In the absence of political power, they became masters of the subtle, architects of the universe within the home and the heart. This unseen influence often operates in the realm of the unconscious. In a relationship, it may look like softness, compromise, or intuition, but beneath it lies a refined ability to guide emotional outcomes without confrontation. It is a mystical form of intelligence, a kind of psychic aikido, where power flows in. Silence. Many men unaware of these undercurrents find themselves slowly molded, not by force but by suggestion. Over time they adapt, shift, and reshape themselves to meet the emotional landscape their partner has invisibly designed. And often they call this peace, unaware that they have surrendered not just autonomy, but pieces of the self. This phenomenon isn't a moral failing. It's an adaptive brilliance born from centuries of spiritual and social restriction. Carl Jung would say that, when denied outward expression, the psyche compensates inwardly. And in this compensation, a new archetype is born, the emotional strategist. She is not villainous, she is not weak, she is the shadow priestess of connection, using subtle cues, symbolic gestures, and intuitive timing to navigate realms where words fail. In this way, spirituality meets psychology, and the feminine becomes both mirror and mold. But when this power goes unseen, it can dominate. It can shape a man's inner world so completely that he forgets the shape of his own soul. In many seemingly harmonious relationships, the man believes he is free, and yet his dreams have shifted, his tone has softened, his decisions defer. Slowly, his fire dims. And the saddest part? He doesn't know why. He believes he's being a good partner, but the truth is more haunting. He has been emotionally absorbed into a system of unconscious influence. This isn't evil, it's alchemy. And unless both partners awaken to the dynamics at play, they will remain trapped in roles they did not consciously choose. The woman too may suffer, craving honesty while subconsciously orchestrating control. It becomes a dance of shadows, where love is no longer presence, but performance. To recognize this dynamic is not to place blame, it is to reclaim awareness. The seeker must ask, who am I in this relationship, and who have I become because of it? Only through this question can one begin to realign with their essence. Through practices like reflective journaling, meditative silence, and symbolic dream work, the soul can begin to discern what is truly theirs and what has been subtly inherited from emotional patterns. The universe always whispers truth beneath the roles we play, and when one dares to listen, something extraordinary happens. The invisible becomes visible, and the game of control transforms into a path of conscious love. And from this realization, the next veil begins to lift. In the quiet spaces between two hearts, a sacred war often brews, not of swords but of symbols, not of noise but of nuance. Love, when unconscious, becomes a battlefield disguised as a sanctuary. Nietzsche saw this clearly. Beneath the surface of harmony, many relationships conceal subtle power struggles, a war of wills wrapped in smiles, a contest of control masked as care. What seems like compromise may be quiet submission. A gentle silence might hide emotional withdrawal. In this battlefield of the soul, the weapons are not physical. They are energetic, psychological, spiritual. The universe, ever observant, watches as we turn intimacy into strategy. Every gesture carries weight. A delayed reply becomes a silent punishment. A forgotten compliment morphs into a declaration of disinterest. The unconscious mind, wounded and reactive, begins to tally emotional debts. Jung described this as the projection of the shadow. All that is disowned within us becomes the thing we fear in the other. What could be? Healing turns into a loop of reactivity. Love is no longer presence but position. And slowly lovers become opponents, both seeking to win a war neither of them remembers declaring. What they call passion is often the fire of unresolved wounds clashing beneath the surface. These dynamics are rarely obvious. They emerge in the dance of giving and withholding, in the rhythm of need and detachment. When one partner begins to dominate, emotionally, mentally, or energetically, the other often responds with passive resistance. Resentment simmers, closeness turns to control, the spirituality of the bond fades, and yet on the outside it all looks peaceful. This is the most dangerous form of conflict, the one that wears the mask of love. Without awareness, the battlefield becomes a maze, one in which both partners wander further from themselves and further from each other. But there is a way out. It begins with noticing how your body feels in their presence, noticing how much of your truth remains unspoken, noticing when affection is a currency and not a gift. These moments of awareness crack the illusion. They invite the seeker to step off the battlefield and into sacred witnessing. Through journaling, symbolic meditation, and deep silence, one can begin to see the game as it is, not to shame it, but to transcend it. The mystic knows all conflict is a call to consciousness, and all control is fear in disguise. So the seeker must ask, am I in love or in survival? It is a subtle yet essential distinction. True love doesn't need victory. It seeks understanding. It doesn't demand sacrifice. It honors truth. And when two souls meet not to complete each other, but to mirror each other's growth, the battlefield dissolves. What remains is not silence born of avoidance, but peace born of presence. And in that sacred space, a new form of love emerges, one that aligns with the rhythm of the universe, one that reflects the soul, not the shadow. And so, from the ruins of unconscious romance, a deeper truth begins to rise. There is a silent myth woven deep into the masculine psyche, the belief that salvation wears a feminine face. For many men, the woman becomes not merely a partner, but a promise of healing, of wholeness, of meaning. Nietzsche, ever the spiritual provocateur, saw this with clarity. He warned that to idealize the woman as redemption is to abandon one's own soul. The man who searches for himself through her eyes risks forgetting how to see it all. In this illusion, love becomes a form of spiritual escapism, a hope that another can restore what was never truly lost, only buried. Beneath this longing lies a deeper ache, the disconnection from the self. Instead of confronting their own inner emptiness, many men seek the mystical refuge of affection, attention, and adoration. The woman becomes the symbol of everything he cannot yet embody: softness, acceptance, nurturing. But this projection turns her into a goddess and him into a worshipper, forever kneeling, forever needing. It's not love. It's dependency disguised as devotion. Carl Jung would recognize this as anima possession, when the man is overtaken by the feminine aspect of his unconscious, projecting onto women the very parts of himself he has yet to integrate. And what happens when this divine illusion breaks, when the woman falters, reveals her shadow, or refuses to carry the weight of his unlived life? The man often collapses. His identity, so deeply entwined with the idea of her perfection, crumbles. He feels betrayed, not because she changed, but because he never truly saw her to begin with. She was never the path to his freedom. She was a mirror, and mirrors, when cracked by truth, reflect not fantasy but self. The universe does not rescue, it reflects, and when one looks to another as a savior, they will always miss the sacred message. Redemption is not found in another's arms, but in one's own awakening. To break this cycle, the seeker must turn inward. He must ask not what the woman can offer him, but what he has yet to offer himself. This is the beginning of spiritual adulthood, where purpose is not borrowed from romance, but forged through individuation. The man must reclaim his dreams, reconnect with solitude, and face the parts of himself he once hoped love would erase. Through practices like symbolic meditation, journaling, conversations with the anima, and engaging in creative solitude, he can begin to retrieve his inner compass. Only then does love become sacred, not sacrificial. So the question must echo into the heart: do I love her, or do I need her to save me? In that question lies the key. When love is freed from the burden of redemption, it becomes a celebration, not of fantasy but of presence. Two souls, meeting not to complete each other, but to walk together in truth. In this space, there is no savior, no worshipper, only equals, awake and aligned. And from this clarity, the next mystery begins to emerge, guided not by need but by the spirituality of wholeness. And as always, the universe waits patiently for the next veil to be lifted. There is a subtle tragedy that unfolds in many relationships, a sacred union that slowly turns into a mirror room where no one is truly seen. This is the realm of relational narcissism, where what is called love is often the echo of one's own emptiness bouncing off the surface of another. In this dynamic, the other is no longer a soul but a reflection, a vessel to validate, to soothe, to confirm one's worth. Nietzsche saw this as one of the most insidious illusions of modern love, not the desire to know the other, but the desperate hunger to be affirmed by them. And so we fall not in love with someone, but with the version of ourselves they reflect. Jung would call this projection a psychic sleight of hand, where we cast our unmet needs onto another, believing they complete us. But what we really seek is not connection, but comfort. The partner becomes a symbolic bandage for an inner wound we've never dared to touch. This is not love. It is emotional outsourcing. It is spiritual bypassing, dressed as devotion. The relationship becomes a hall of mirrors. And when the image begins to distort, when the other no longer reflects back our ideal self, we feel betrayed. Not because they've changed, but because they've stopped feeding the illusion we mistook for intimacy. In this energetic contract, each partner plays a role, often unconsciously. One offers validation, the other offers performance. They orbit each other, not in harmony, but in dependency. And when the validation fades, as it always does, frustration, resentment, and confusion flood in. The connection unravels, but rather than see the deeper truth, many jump to the next mirror, hoping the reflection will finally satisfy the soul. But it never does, because the ache we're trying to heal isn't in the other, it's within. And the universe, in its mystical precision, keeps sending the same pattern until we finally turn inward. The way out begins with presence. True spirituality demands radical honesty. Am I seeing this person, or am I only seeing my need for them? This question opens the door to sacred awareness. Through dreamwork, journaling emotional triggers, and meditative observation of our relationship patterns, we begin to see the outlines of our shadow. And in doing so, we begin to dissolve the illusion. Love no longer becomes a transaction. It becomes a witnessing. We start to engage not from lack, but from fullness, not from fear, but from presence. And in that shift, something sacred begins to return. So the invitation is clear. Step away from the mirror. Look not for your reflection in another, but for the soul behind the eyes. Love is not meant to reinforce the ego. It's meant to soften it. In a conscious union, the other does not exist to complete you, but to walk beside you as both of you unfold. When we stop demanding that love be a remedy, we allow it to become a revelation. And in this revelation, the mystical essence of love is restored, as a space where two beings meet not to possess, but to witness. And in that witnessing, the universe breathes a little deeper and prepares us for what's next. There is a hidden fire that burns quietly beneath many relationships, one not born of love, but of pain. It's the fire of emotional revenge. Nietzsche, with his piercing insight into human nature, unveiled a truth few dare to admit. Sometimes what we call love is just resentment in disguise, a reaction, not a connection, a silent rebellion against past wounds, ex-lovers, societal expectations, or even one's own inner shame. In this distorted form, love becomes a ritual of proving, I am worthy, I have moved on, I will not be forgotten. And so, intimacy becomes strategy. The heart becomes a weapon, not a sanctuary. This is not conscious vengeance, it is spiritual amnesia. The seeker believes they are entering something new, something healing, but beneath the surface, old ghosts are steering the ship. Jung would call this repetition compulsion, a pattern where unresolved trauma recreates itself, hoping for redemption but finding only replay. The partner unknowingly becomes a symbol of someone else, a stage for past grief to reappear, dressed in new clothes. And as the relationship unfolds, it follows a familiar script: passion, possession, disillusionment, collapse. The universe whispers again and again, this is not love, this is your shadow asking to be seen. These cycles of emotional revenge are deeply mystical in nature, for they reveal the places within us still ruled by the past. They expose our sacred wounds, the scars we have not yet honored. Many enter new relationships not to connect, but to conquer, to rewrite the ending of a story that hurt them. But stories, when denied, do not heal. They haunt. And until we sit, with our sorrow grieve what was lost, and make peace with our unmet needs, we will continue to seek healing in the wrong temples. Spirituality begins the moment we stop seeking justice through others and begin seeking wholeness within. So what can be done? The seeker must pause, must ask, what brought me here? Love, or a wound, demanding closure? Through deep introspection, dream journaling, and observing the synchronicities that echo our relational choices, the deeper truth begins to unfold. When you find yourself triggered or overly invested in proving your worth, ask yourself whose voice you're really trying to silence. Often, it's the voice of your own inner critic, the part of you that never felt enough. Until that part is heard, no partner can truly meet you, because they are being asked to love not just you, but your ghost. And so, the journey continues, not toward another, but inward, toward the places still hurting, still seeking revenge disguised as romance. And, when you dare to face these wounds with gentleness, the pattern begins to dissolve. Love becomes spacious again, not a performance, but a presence. The mystical dance of the soul resumes its natural rhythm, and as the cycle of emotional vengeance ends, a new chapter begins, not in drama, but in peace. The universe, ever watchful, sighs in relief and prepares to teach the next sacred lesson. There is a kind of love that does not scream, does not beg, and does not bind. It arrives like a breeze. At dawn, soft, certain, and liberating. Nietzsche spoke of this love, not as a rejection of passion, but as a radical redefinition. He envisioned a revolution, one where love is no longer dependency, masked as devotion, but clarity dressed in intimacy. This is lucid love, a connection grounded not in need but in choice. It is the love of awakened souls, those who no longer seek salvation, but companionship along the path. And in this sacred unfolding, the universe smiles, for it recognizes its own rhythm being mirrored in human hearts. Lucid love is rare, not because it's unreachable, but because few are ready for the level of self-awareness it demands. It asks you to stand alone before you join, to know your wounds before asking another to hold them. Jung would say this is the dance of individuation, where one integrates their shadow and walks whole into the realm of connection. In this space, drama dissolves, control loses its appeal, and instead of needing the other to complete you, you begin to celebrate their freedom as much as your own. There is no more chasing, no more fixing, just presence, just soul. This form of love resembles deep friendship more than fiery obsession. It breathes, it allows, it honors solitude as much as union. You are not anxious in its silence, nor desperate in its distance. It feels like alignment, not performance. The spirituality within this bond is subtle but powerful. Two people becoming sacred mirrors, not to reflect wounds, but to amplify growth. They walk side by side, not entangled but interwoven, each one a full expression of self, each one deeply rooted in their own purpose. And from that rootedness, a new kind of intimacy blossoms, the kind that nourishes rather than consumes. But make no mistake, lucid love is not void of passion. It simply redefines it. Passion here is not chaos, it is presence. It is the fire of two souls meeting not to escape themselves, but to express themselves fully. In this space, arguments become rituals of deeper understanding, triggers become gateways to healing, and every interaction, no matter how small, carries the potential for transcendence. The mystical energy of this love is found not in grand gestures, but in shared silence, in aligned values, in the quiet knowing that you are safe to be exactly who you are. So the revolution begins, not out there, but within. When you stop searching for a rescuer and start becoming your own source of light. When love is no longer about being saved, but about being seen. Lucid love is not a destination, it is a practice. A sacred vow to remain conscious, even when it's easier to fall back into patterns. And once you taste it, the old forms of love, the ones laced with fear, chaos, and control, lose their allure. Because now you've remembered. You've remembered what the universe was always trying to teach, that love, in its highest form, is not possession, it is liberation. And the next step is integration. At the heart of every sacred journey lies a single truth. No love can be conscious if the self remains unconscious. The path toward conscious love begins not in the arms of another, but in the quiet solitude of one's own soul. Nietzsche whispered this wisdom between the lines of his philosophy, that to love wisely, one must first confront the chaos within. This is not the easy road. It is the descent into the inner labyrinth. It is where the seeker begins to question every role they've played, every story they've told, every desire that was never truly theirs. And in that descent, a deeper form of spirituality awakens. Carl Jung called this the process of individuation, the soul's sacred unfolding, the slow integration of shadow and light. To walk this path is to trade illusion for truth, fantasy for presence. It is to meditate in silence not to escape, but to hear the voice that's always been there. It is to journal not for answers, but to meet the parts of yourself that never had the chance to speak. It is to observe the universe, not through logic but through symbols, dreams and synchronicities. These are the whispers of your deeper self, the signs that you are being called back to your essence. This process is not glamorous. It often begins in pain, in heartbreak, betrayal, or a season of profound emptiness. These are not punishments. They are initiations. The alchemy of the soul requires fire. Only through discomfort do we begin to see the unconscious patterns we've lived for years. Only through solitude do we recognize the false selves we've worn like armor. And only through the courage to stay, to feel, to witness, to reflect, does the true self begin to emerge. From this inner clarity, the way we love changes. It softens, it slows. It no longer seeks to possess, but to share. Conscious love is the fruit of this inner revolution. It does not arise overnight. It is cultivated in the sacred soil of patience, self-awareness, and emotional maturity. It is choosing presence over performance, truth over comfort, and freedom over control. It is love that does not cling but blesses, that does not rescue but respects. In this space, both partners are whole, not perfect but present. They meet not from a place of lack but from an overflowing fullness. They don't lose themselves in the union. They expand within it. And that expansion echoes through the universe like music played in divine harmony. So the seeker must choose, remain in the familiar cycle of unconscious longing, or step into the unknown landscape of authentic connection. It requires discipline, in solitude, in reflection, in choosing peace over passion. It requires letting go of stories that no longer serve and opening to a love that honors the self. This kind of love won't go viral. It won't be a spectacle, but it will be the foundation of a soul at peace. And from that stillness, the most powerful transformation can arise, the fusion of love and consciousness, the union of self and other, the alignment with the deeper rhythms of the mystical universe. And so, from this place of inner clarity, the journey begins again. Now it's your turn. Have you ever felt like you were losing yourself in love, slowly, silently, without even noticing? What patterns have shaped your relationships without your permission? Share your experience in the comments. Your story might awaken someone else's soul. And if this journey stirred something within you, don't leave without subscribing. Activate the notifications so you never miss another moment of deep insight, truth, and spiritual transformation. This channel is a sanctuary for seekers like you. And if you're ready to dive even deeper into the invisible forces that shape your mind, your soul, and your destiny, watch the next video appearing right here on your screen. It's calling you. With wisdom and presence, celestial truths.